So thanks for joining us today. And this is, as advertised, mostly going to be a Q&A. And so we'll say a few things just to set a little bit of context, but really a lot of what happens in this space now will be in response to the questions that you all have. And so I'll come around with a microphone. And just in terms of how we're approaching this, in my role as president of the congregation right now, I'll speak to or be best equipped to talk about process questions of, like, as a church, what do we do when we're looking at a transition like this? And I'll say the good news that I'll just start off with is, as a church with a more than 300 years of history, we have faced changes like this before. And so it's not completely uncharted territory. We also have the support of the UCC, and of course, the support of our congregation and staff. And all of those play a really critical role in helping us be intentional and thoughtful about how we do this. And so again, in my role here today, I'll be mostly speaking about process and just how we're thinking about approaching all of this. And then Jeremy, I think, has a more expansive role to play here, maybe.
Thanks, Jerry. And just so you know, I'm up here not to be in a lofty place, but viral levels are a little higher and there's a fan, so that's why I'm up here. I think I can reflect on sort of my role as minister in this moment, which is a little different than it's been for 13 years, so in the transitional moment. And then also I'm really honestly reflecting on about 24 years of being a senior pastor in progressive Christian churches, and so I can answer the kinds of questions about how church is in this moment, what I sort of see, how our family is doing and what we're doing, if that's not clear. And also, I'm here for the Ask Me Anything sections. Anything you ever wanted to ask a minister, now's a good time to ask that, and could be fun. So we can let the conversation go wherever we'd like it to go.
Sounds good. And so we'll pass around the mics. I won't speak a lot on process now, but I can tell you where the conversation is in case that addresses any questions in advance, and we'll go from there. So some of this has been shared by email, but coming out of Jeremy's announcement, there's, of course, the big question of, okay, what next once you've had a chance to process? This is a big transition for us. And so in speaking with the UCC, who supports churches of all, UCC sizes and shapes with transitions, there are a variety of paths that congregations can take. A number of them we've discussed as council are not paths for us for obvious reasons. We're not changing physical locations. The church is healthy and vibrant in many ways. And so the biggest question is, what's our path towards continuing to be a vibrant place of worship as we have been? And the most common path to that is to find another senior minister. And that usually involves an interim process, so hiring an interim minister. And the reasons for that there's a few. One of them, of course, is replacing some of what the senior minister has been playing, that critical role in the church. The other thing is, because it is they call it an intentional interim, meaning that this is not the person that would take on the role longer term, but would help the church, and I think usefully with a little bit of distance, reflect. We've been really blessed to have senior ministers who have had very long tenures at Circular. Of course, many here would recall Bert. We all know Jeremy. And an intentional interim is, in addition to playing the role of senior minister in that interim period, also helping us as a community to reflect on, where are we? Where are we going? We have done some things, I think, really intentionally and really well, and I'm sure there will be interest in continuing those things. There may be things that we look at with fresh eyes during this process, and all of that would then lead to creating a church community profile. Who are we as Circular? And then looking at people that may feel called to come to the position of our next senior minister. The paths to that is informed by the congregation. And so, should we head in an interim direction? That's a first question that council is discussing now. It'd be a proposal that would be brought to council. And then that would ultimately be brought for the congregation. There'd probably be a visit from someone that would be willing or interested in playing an interim role. And then we would decide as a congregation, do we head in that direction? Then there'd be a search committee formed after we have some time getting settled with an interim and thinking about that profile. There would be a search committee formed, and that would be the body that would engage with the UCC in looking at all the details of who are the people who may feel called to circular, and ultimately getting to a process that would involve visits and then a final vote for us as a congregation. So I think the big ideas here is there is a longer process heading in that direction. It would also engage a lot of congregational voice, both in the particulars of discerning, is this the right person for us for right now, but also in the big questions of, well, who are we as Circular right now in this moment? Where are we heading? And then what might that mean for the type of senior leadership that we think is important? And so I'll stop there because I think your questions will guide us in more fruitful directions. But let me pause there and say, Jeremy, is there anything else that you want to say just from your vantage point before there are further questions?
Not too much, only just to welcome any questions. And I think the more we can communicate clearly and better, the better off we'll be. I've heard some pretty funny things about what are happening that may not be always accurate, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to write a book, or all this, things that are probably not the case. But whatever we can do to tell the story and to share with each other. And I just briefly was speaking with someone at the picnic, I guess last week, and it's someone who's a longtime church member, and it became clear in our conversation that she didn't know I was leaving. And I told her that, and she went, "Oh my gosh, you're leaving. And where are you going?" And I shared where, and I said, "Well, I had some good doctors up there when I had cancer last year." And she went, "Oh my gosh, you had cancer." So sometimes we think everybody knows everything, but they don't. So I think part of this is designed. There are no questions that are out of bounds, and we really want to be just as clear as possible so everyone knows.
So the mic is open. Yeah.
So, Jeremy, in any given year, what's the pool of applicants that would be interested in a senior minister position in a church like this? Like what was it like when you were applying for the job? I mean, is it are there recent graduates or people that are moving on from a different church? Or I mean, what's the pool of available resources there?
It's a good question. So I would say this is informed conjecture, right? But it's informed after a long time of doing this, and I have a lot of colleagues. This church would get a lot of applicants from all around the country. That it's becoming more and more rare to have full-time positions with benefits in progressive churches that seem to be flourishing. All of that put together is rare and would be extremely attractive. So I want the church to feel good about that. It's also really helpful that there's no conflict, there's no schism, there's no scandal. I'm stepping back because my body and my lungs have said 50 hours is too much, but there's nothing wrong, and that's also attractive. Like, other ministers don't want to come to a church that just had a big split, so I hope that's not too much, inside baseball, but I would expect some outstanding candidate. Like, it's sort of exciting, and that could include any number of people, including people already here. So I think I'm told, and someone else would have to say, I think there were maybe 50 or 60 candidates. Stephanie, do you know, for this when I interviewed the previous church where I was, there were about 100. That was a liberal Baptist church, and there are none of those. So that was more people wanted to go, I think, within that tradition. But that creates a lot of work for search committees in a good way. But there's a lot to go through, and I only share that part because congregations are often ready to know what's next, but the intentional work of going through each profile and each person, it kind of pays off in the end, but it takes a little time. So, does that answer your question, Mark? Yeah.
My question's sort of along the same lines, but might be more addressed to people who were here before when Jeremy was in the search. But when the ad goes out, is it only to Congregationalists, ministers in the Congregationalist tradition that are seeing the application, or does it go out nationwide, or what sort of how is it advertised, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So what we have discussed so far is, our main affiliation is with the UCC. If there are any other affiliations that would be open, like I think Jeremy had just become UCC before coming to Circular. And so there are circumstances like that, but the intention, if we go in intentional interim direction, which is what we are thinking, would be a nationwide search primarily looking in the UCC.
Add that social media is a much bigger network now than it was even 13 years ago. So I imagine word and interest will spread in an organic way, a little bit differently than in the past.
Yeah, and to that, the only thing I would add is, both everything that Jeremy and Stephanie have said is true. The other reality is political climate. And someone not familiar with what Circular is in the Southeast may have to do some searching of what would this mean for maybe if I, think of myself of someone who practices or preaches a progressive theology. Is there a home for that in Charleston? And I think what we will do as a congregation with creating our church profile will make a difference there. But also the political climate is a reality that any candidate thinking of where they may be moving will have on their minds. And that's just being passed along from the UCC when they're thinking about, how they're working with ministers across the country as well.
What does the timeline look like this fall? What's the plan in September?
Yeah? Okay. So there's a few different elements to that. A basic timeline would probably mean that even if we head fairly quickly in the direction of hiring an intentional interim, there'd be probably a few months, it might be end of the calendar year, before that person would go through the full process and be here. And so this is not a quick thing necessarily, just something for us all to keep in mind. And so, I was speaking with Susan on Friday. I'm not sure if she's here now, but I know different personnel is thinking about what does this mean for budget? And we're having those conversations. Worship committee is thinking about what does that mean for us in terms of worship? And so we've been looking at the calendar and saying, here are the dates. And from speaking with Susan on Friday, we actually think we have a pretty good handle on most Sundays in terms of teaching, leveraging, of course, Evelyn, who can't be here today, and her willingness to teach, more than she has been in this moment, which, just to say, her role is still associate minister. This is not a role change, and so she has sort of generously, because she wants to support the church, talked with us about what that might look like. But it's also not the case that everything the senior minister does is automatically on Evelyn's plate. There's a reason we've had a senior and an associate minister, because of the full volume of work. So without going too much down too many rabbit holes, what happens in September is I think worship committee is looking at what is that slate of people that are going to help run services really from now through the new year, and then looking at other aspects of life in the church, such as budgeting and all of that. We're doing the same thing. So trying to get ahead, anticipating that we won't have an interim person here probably until end of the calendar year is what we're expecting.
When we hire the interim minister, will that person be here for a set period of time, like 12 months or 18 months or whatever, or just until we find the person we are going to hire ultimately?
Yeah, so it's from our discussions with the UCC, it's not a set period, like it must be 18 months exactly. Some of the variables in there would be if an internal candidate would put themselves forward. And so just to name, Evelyn is in this conversation. Of course, she has her own discernment to go through of whether this is the right thing for her. And of course, we as a church will have a process of discernment too. But internal candidates would be handled before external candidates would be considered. And so heading with an interim does not mean that Evelyn would or would not become senior minister should she determine she'd want to be considered. But beyond that, I think 12 to 18 months is sort of a reasonable expectation for a period of time. It depends on the pool of people interested, also when they're available. If they're at another church, they would want to plan that transition on their side before joining here. And so there are some variables that could shorten or lengthen it, but that's the time period that has sort of been forecast that we could consider.
This is for Jeremy. Jared spoke about the change of culture here that would be possible for a future minister. Are you ready for the change of culture going to the Middle Atlantic Conference area and to blue Maryland? I lived in Montgomery County, Maryland for 50 years. I came here from Silver Spring, Maryland. So I know everything. But it was a shock for me to come here. This church was a haven for me. So I hope you find the same, that you can enjoy being there.
Thanks. I can only say, I don't know. So the last time I lived in a blue state, I was 6. And it was, I don't remember, the politics of it at the time, but how would I put it? I mean, I think for Sarah as a teacher, we're excited about having a teachers union, about being able to do DEI in school, about some ways that she'll be a little more free, I think, as a teacher. And having said that, we love the school here and the students. And so I'm looking forward to that for her. And I do wonder, having spent my professional life in very progressive places and very red states, I feel like when you're always swimming against the tide, you get pretty strong. You're pretty good at self-definition. It means something. And I don't know what it'll be like when when you're with the tide a little more. And I'm curious. I do think that's probably a way of saying, I think there's something special that happens in communities like this one. And I suspect I will miss that, But I'm also really looking forward to Maryland's multiculturalism and the way that is easier than here. I don't know how when I was up in Baltimore last year, it was I'll just put it this way. I called home and said, everywhere I go, everybody is there. And that's not true in Mount Pleasant. So that part culturally would be interesting to experience. But come through Maryland. There are a lot of, it's lovely how many people here have ties as well.
So 2 questions. In the interim selection process, is it all you guys at the top and the council? Who votes for that? And my concern is, how do they afford to live here?
Great question, and one that's probably familiar to all of us in different ways. But on the selection part, so our Constitution, as well as the UCC, are sort of dual guides or really sources of input here. Our Constitution establishes a particular selection committee set up by our nominating committee to eventually select a called senior minister. That's not the same case necessarily for an interim, and so this would be probably something put together in a proposal for council's consideration. The initial thinking is that probably people elected in this round of leadership, because this was the leaders are elected by our congregation at our annual meeting, would be on that interim committee, as well as people that have a view towards like personnel. What are we thinking about in terms of contract? And a big part of that, as we've discussed with the UCC, is if someone's living in Charleston, they need to be able to live in Charleston, and cost of living is considerable. And so that's something that we're anticipating in terms of our budget and feel okay with, but I think it's certainly something for a candidate's mind of, well, what is the cost of living in the place that I might be called to serve? And so that's that's an active discussion with the UCC and something we're planning about budgetarily, and also I'm sure will be a conversation point with anyone that may be interested.
This is mainly for Jeremy, but it might circle to you, Jared. To me, one of the things that you have most helped our church with is to get outside of this church and outside of this congregation, to partner with charity, to connect with the wider the wider community in and out of church, but also, other churches and other people aspiring to justice, not just Cajun, but broadly. So for you, I'm wondering whether you've had a time and a way to say goodbye to those people who not only care about us, but you've really been the bridge. And in our search, I don't want to require that somebody go above and beyond all the duties of this but I think it's important for us to keep that. We could get too inbred and too insular if we're not actively communicating. And as a practical matter, perhaps consider, at least in an advisory role, having some of our key community partners weighing in the search, looking at some of our most serious candidates, advising us on how to describe our congregation and our community. Because I think if their voices are part of it from the get-go, we'll draw somebody who is listening for that voice. So I didn't let you answer the question, but I just want to make sure.
I'm going backwards from where you ended. With the search, it's not terribly appropriate for me to offer a lot of advice, but I think it would be helpful. I probably wouldn't, if I were leading the search, I wouldn't have other groups outside vote or anything like that, but I might ask them, could you describe our church and share that with candidates? Or how do you view circular in the community? What's circular like? That might be really helpful for someone, because then they know what the expectation is, what the presence is, to either build on or what, that could be lovely. Could also be interesting to have that reflected back to us for this group. I have had some chances to begin saying goodbye. That's part of taking the summer. So before that congregational letter went out, I called our leaders and some staff, and I called Reverend Rivers, and Rabbi Stephanie, and Adam Shoemaker, and Rebecca Hines, people that are really dear to me. Because this has been this role for me, and I think for a lot of us, there are kind of two congregations. There's this one, and then there's Charleston, and our partners and friends there, and that's really powerful. Did that answer your question? I mean, yeah, and yeah. Jared can speak to this, and the group can as it develops a profile. I think that's part of the job. And I think it was part of the job when I got here, thanks to the role of many good people. But I just think that's part of the ethos of the whole place. So.
Yeah. I broadly agree. And I guess the word that was coming to mind is sort of like a question of self-definition. Because we're telling people interested in the role who we are and what we're looking for. Well, yeah, without putting too fine a point on it, like, I'm not sure how much I would be here if that wasn't in the ethos of our congregation. And so I think it is sort of how do we define ourselves and what we're looking for. And I think for the right person, that will be like, yes, that's the way that I view my ministry, my role as a senior minister. I think the thing that in an interim period is, I don't think an interim won't be a new Jeremy in many ways, but I think we'll probably rely on connections within the congregation to many aspects of our justice work. So I think an interim will be able to do many things, but I think some of the depth of relationships that Jeremy has cultivated in 13 years will foster goodwill with people that we've had close relationships over time, but probably hard for someone in an interim capacity to be the Jeremy in that relationship. So I think that we'll look to, absolutely, yeah.
So my question is for you about the process. The way I understood what you said a little while ago was that there would be an interim minister, and during that time, you guys would be evaluating and thinking about internal candidates, and then if you chose not to go that way, then you would start an external search. I'm wondering why that would be a two-step process. It seems like that would slow things down, and it would also make it harder for the committee and harder on internal candidates to be sort of navigating whether or not they're competitive, because they're not competing necessarily with anybody else. I think I'm wondering why you would go that way.
Yeah, it's a good question, and correct me if I'm not hearing it correctly as well. So I think one of the questions that's different from Bert's transition out of the senior minister role is we didn't have an associate minister. And so although she's not here, I know people have approached Evelyn or people like myself saying, well, clearly it's Evelyn. Actually, it's not. That's both like process-wise, but also just giving her full agency of what she wants to do in the process. And so there is a world in which a church with multiple clergy may appoint an acting senior minister in an interim period instead of pulling in an interim. And so our process is not to go the acting route. That's what we're not thinking right now, but to call an interim. What that would mean is if someone that is an internal candidate like Evelyn would want to put herself forward, she could. But in conversations that we've had right now, the decision has not been to go in an acting direction. And so that's why we are thinking about the interim process, which would not exclude her from consideration should she put herself forward, but it also doesn't put her in there right now. Is that along the lines of what you were asking about? Yeah. Yeah. And so there's also a possibility we'll have no internal candidates. I think that's one. I think the other thing, too, is in many cases, this is talking with the UCC, external candidates will not express interest or be reticent to express interest if they know there are internal candidates that are putting themselves forward. And that's why it would be sequenced in that way, just because people may not come forward that would otherwise be good candidates. What's that? Yeah. Absolutely. So, yes. Absolutely. So if you need to go for parking reasons, please, you can please feel free to go at any time. And thank you for the good questions. And if you do have other questions, we can stick around for a little bit longer. So are there other questions out there? Yeah.
So obviously, you know, I grew up, my dad's a pastor. And one thing I was wondering is with Evelyn being associate and taking on more Sundays or taking on more work, is there some thought on like compensation and that like, even though we're not intending on her kind of stepping into the role, like she might kind of end up in that sometimes. So just wondering if that's, I'd like it to be fair, I guess is my thought.
Yeah, it's both a great question out of fairness and also very practically, right? What does it mean for budget? What does it mean for a number of different things? I think one of the principles we've been trying to think about as leadership and council is to not have everything default be Evelyn will do it, because it could become very easy and unfair for that to be the assumption. And so that has meant, I think, some explicit conversations between Jeremy and Evelyn. It's also been conversations between myself and others in leadership and Evelyn just about her needs, what she's interested in this time. And so I won't speak for Susan, but I think in thinking about like teaching these additional Sundays and things like that, that's been an active conversation. And so what I can't, I would say in full honesty guarantee is that will never happen and there won't be any of that. What I can say is we're all trying to be very aware and intentional about that so it doesn't become honestly an issue of something that would just be not sustainable or fair, if that makes sense.
So is the current thinking that if we do have an interim, that person is not really a candidate for a permanent?
Yes, and Jeremy, maybe you have other experience with this, but I think the UCC describes it as an intentional interim, like they're going, and usually this is the role they play. They have the skill set of a senior minister, but also are skilled in helping the congregation take stock of where they are, think about that self-definition process of a church. And so it is some of the senior minister attributes that we have come to know in terms of teaching and care for congregation, but there's also a set of things related to planning and reflection that this interim would do and then would not be considered, I think in all cases, I can double check that, as a candidate for a called senior minister role. Jeremy, is there anything that you would add from your experience about that?
No, I mean, I would maybe just add there are different kinds of interims. Thankfully, we don't need the specialists who come in when there's been a big conflict. They're very expensive, you know, and very specialized, and that's common for churches to have conflict. We just need, I think, if it's chosen, just the sort of regular interim, which is also a skill set to come in, help a church think through some questions, work out its profile, help get ready for what's next, and honestly do a lot of regular work during the week that allows the rest of the staff and congregation to be in the process of the larger search. And it's I would just, the only general encouragement I have is to be good to the interim. You know, people ought to, I think, somewhat unfairly treat the interim as if they're the next senior minister. So they're like, well, I don't like this preaching style, so I'm not going to come, or I don't like this or that. So, but it's temporary, you know, and it's a very specific role. And I'm grateful for the work that interims do to help congregations and then to sort of prepare for what's next. And the joke is, to add a little levity to this, among clergy, those of us who do settled work, like me, look at interims and go, I don't know how you do this for 9 months. And they look at us and go, I don't know how you do this for 10 years. And so they're different skill sets, but they're both really important. So,
I would like to throw in a little bit because I had a lot of experience with the last time we had an interim. And so we learned that go around. I think our expectations for what an interim was going to be able to do were way too high last time around. I think this time we're very realistic about the fact that in terms of the, the structure of the worship is going to need to come from us. Because, in fact, we have very peculiar and specified standards for our worship that even a very, very trained interim minister may not get. And I think we're more prepared this time around to make sure that we take responsibility for that, because that's in fact something we know and we can do. And we're not just going to step back and say, take care of us, Daddy. You know, we're not going to do it that way, which is a little bit what we were sort of hoping for last time around and couldn't get, because it's really very, very unrealistic. But I think it could be a very different experience than we had last go-round.
Thanks, Susan. And I won't add more to that because we had a quick conversation in a council meeting since Jeremy's announcement, and we just sort of asked around, like, how many people in that body were here during the last interim period? Some were, some weren't. Some started coming to Circular during the interim period. And so there's a full range of experiences with that. But I think one of the things that we've heard from people who had experienced it in a variety of ways is, how do we, as a congregation, make clear through the whole process about what really is important to us and sustaining some of that, knowing it is a time of transition, but also that there are some things that I think we're staffed and structured now to sustain that may be a bit different from the last interim period, as I understand it.
Okay, so I had a couple. Excuse me. One of them is, Jeremy, are you likely to have some sort of ministry role in Baltimore?
Oh, could you repeat the first part?
Yes. Are you likely to have some sort of a ministry role in Baltimore?
I don't think so.
All right.
I don't really know how to do it part-time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I would want to try.
Sure.
So I think creatively I'll probably see what else there is.
Are you going to continue to write on WordPress?
I will write in some fashion, but I don't know what. And I wish the whole group, the larger group, had heard this. I don't have any plans to write a book. I keep hearing about the book that I'm writing, but I'm not. And the blog, if you know it, which you can access through the website, most things that I've written are there. So anybody can read them for free, but assembling them and trying to print them honestly doesn't appeal to me. So I'll figure out what form the writing takes, but I don't know yet. Yeah.
I was just thinking about, the possibility of following you online.
Sure. And we'll share where we are and what we're doing. There's a curious, so there's a clear boundary on the one hand, which is once I am gone, I won't be the minister at all. And I will never have an opinion on a church matter ever again. You can ask me and I'll say, no opinion. So there's an easy boundary to draw out of respect for the church and whomever is coming after. That's really important to me. The trickier one for me is we're still people, and in the future, if people pass through Maryland, we'd love to have a cup of coffee, or we're not going into hiding, or it's not. So I want to keep a good, healthy boundary in terms of the practice of ministry. I just won't be a minister. But your question, Paul, about will the writing, I may have a Substack or this or that, and it'll be out there. But I just name that I want to be really mindful that I will be, let me put it this way, the afternoon of September 7th, I will no longer be the minister, but I really will be on the front row of the cheering section for Circular. I will be hoping for the best and kind of watching quietly, cheering for everyone, but I won't have any role. Does that make sense? And it's really important. So that's where I find this, that's the personal challenge, is because we really do love people here. And also it's important to give space and to let the next chapter for this community be the next chapter too. So we will do our best to do that ethically and well and respectfully, but it's a little, yeah.
And the other one is sort of more for Jared. I've been following, I understand that this is extremely unlikely, however. What if with the interim minister, lightning strikes and they decide, oh, they want to stay and we would love for him to stay and so forth? Would that end the search, or what happens next?
Yeah, I believe that has happened in the history of interims. My understanding, again, from this is that would be a conversation we would have up front of whether that would be even a possibility. And in most cases, I think the understanding from the beginning is this would not be a continuing relationship, even if things are going really well. And I think part of their role in that is to help us be prepared for the next called minister. And so it's a bit of a particular role where, I hate to draw an analogy here, that's not the right thing, but if they do their job extremely well, I think we will also be ready for the next called minister, even if we had a fantastic experience with them.
So with the interim minister, is it also a selection process? Are there multiple interim candidates that you have to look at to decide, or how does that work?
Yes, and a smaller process, because the pool of people who do that work, as Jeremy was saying, is a smaller set of people. And so, but that's also the reason why they said, moving in this direction, it would probably still be end of the calendar year before someone would come. So this is anticipating a little bit, but I would expect that the person that would be a finalist would be able to visit beforehand, and we'd be able to have that engagement with the congregation before they would come in for their interim period. That's my understanding, and so we'll be in communication about that, but everything I've heard from the UCC has been in that direction.
So since that's a temporary position, 12 to 18 months, does UCC help with any funding for their housing?
No, that's part of our budget. Yep. Yeah, so we'd be thinking about how can we support this person with probably a rental need during the time that they'd be here. Yep. I'm cognizant that we've been here for a while. There's certainly, I think, willingness to engage with further discussion. I also know that I have 2 people with headphones that are going to be pulling on me for lunch fairly soon. But are there any more questions today? And if not, you can find myself or Jeremy or other elected leaders in the church, and we can talk through it. But any more questions that we want to put out there today? Jay? Yeah.
It's not really a question as much as a kind of like word to like, I think we're gonna be okay. But yeah, it seems to me that as long as like, the church knows who it is and our style and all of that, kind of like to speak to what Susan was saying earlier, like as long as, I think we're gonna be okay. Just to kind of give some peace of mind. And I also want to give a thanks to everyone who is working so hard on this. So yeah, that's it. And a thank you to Jeremy.
Thanks.
I think that's the perfect way to end. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah.